Terraforming an entire planet is a colossal undertaking that would take lifetimes to complete. So assuming you're that committed to seeing it through, how do you even start? Something we talk a lot about on this show is traveling to new worlds and terraforming them, but there's a big gap between those two. We'll be covering the gap today between terraforming and paraterraforming, as well as bioforming, to look at that period after initial civilization has gotten set up, but before the planet could be considered Earth-like by any measure. It's too much to cover in a single episode though, so we will be looking at building biospheres next month, December 1st, 2024, where we'll try to look at it from a different perspective. To make sure you get notified when that and other episodes come out, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, and please hit the like button while you're at it. It's a big topic, bigger than even 2 episodes can cover, but we'll try to get to as much as we can today, and we'll be here for a bit, so grab a drink and a snack, and let's get started building a new world. Terraforming is the process of making a planet more Earth-like, like adding water to a desert planet, and it's one of 5 basic approaches to spreading humanity, or any civilization, out to the stars. One form of this is bioforming. This is where you adapt people and organisms to a planet rather than alter the planet to them. This could be genetic engineering, medications, or cybernetic augmentation, and the term cyborg, short for cybernetic organism, was actually coined with adapting people to space and alien environments in mind. Another is para-terraforming, which is your domed habitats and other artificial structures requiring regular and extensive maintenance that keep the place Earth-like. The extension of this is to skip planets entirely, except as resource stockpiles, and instead build artificial megastructures like the O'Neill Cylinder to live in, or the Stanford Torus. We usually assume all 4 of these options are getting used, and that each planet will find a happy medium based on its conditions and the folks who settle it, and that this medium will also shift with time as options and desires also shift. Our 5th one, for the sake of completeness, is to go utterly post-biological, such as a computer mind. This isn't limited to AI either. You might take mini humans and put them into the Matrix, either with their body or just their brain in a jar, or even as a digital upload, and use all the planet's resources to build many thousands or even millions of artificial virtual environments. And again, we would expect this to occur even if the others were occurring too. In science fiction, and even serious space speculation, we tend to be so focused on that new planet and pioneering of it that we often forget that they will likely have space habitats orbiting the planet from the outset. Indeed, it's a better use of any leftover colony ship than trying to land on a planet, since they are still going to need to set up their own internet, Wikipedia, news sites, online video games and chat forums, and virtual realities for folks to enjoy. All the more so because they will have few people and luxuries living on some desolate planet, and so having the ability to chat to everyone planet-wide and venture off into escapist virtual kingdoms for an evening are likely to be important options to the colonists. And this is the period we are interested in today, so I think it is important to recognize that our settlers are trying to build a civilization, not just a planet, and trying to have lives of their own that take precedence over some 10,000-year terraforming project. It's also not just those early settlers. If you've been living in some dome or underground habitat your whole life and need to don a spacesuit to go for a walk, the idea of sacrificing for generations more to come might not appeal to you. Alternatively, it might be something like a holy quest, like we see with the Fremen on the planet Arrakis in Frank Herbert's Dune, which, while pretty lifeless by our standards, is actually much more livable than most planets we're likely to find. Or you might decide all this talk of having an Earth-like planet is a silly waste of time and money when the planet is already very nice. Indeed, in the later books in those novels, when they are the center of an empire and can afford to terraform their planets, many of the natives resent the changes they once dreamed of, and which they have been slowly changing through far more limited processes of their own for many generations before. Speaking of that, we will mention more advanced or late-stage terraforming options as we go, but for the most part, we are assuming a relatively minimalist ability and faster strategies, so if we get to a planet where the gravity is too low, creating and dropping a micro black hole in its center to add mass, or dumping another planet on it to add mass that way, are options but not the kind we're looking at now. We also need to note that timelines and scale are pretty big question marks and lots of considerations for terraforming, but also common hand waves. As an example, Earth averages just over 3 feet or just over 1 meter of rainfall a year, some places more and some less of course. Trying to get your atmosphere, day length, and temperature right to replicate that would be very tricky. More importantly though, if you want to give a planet Earth-like oceans, and need to bring that in by comets or icy bodies dragged in from the outer system, if you let those burn up on entry to generate rain, and at the equivalent of a meter a year, on top of what you might get from normal evaporation of those seas as you fill them, you would need a few thousand years to fill your oceans. You would also sweep away basically every bit of existing landscape as the planet gets power washed down to the bedrock, then has its tectonic plates, assuming it has any, shoved around by dropping quadrillions of tons of water on previously empty low-lying region. What's more, those icy rocks burning up in the atmosphere are not turning into rain because the planet's warm air is melting them, but rather because they are slamming into a wall of air at many thousands of meters per second. The icy rock contains more kinetic energy about to turn into heat than its weight in jet fuel, possibly several times over. So if you're adding water too fast, beyond the non-stop rain and mudslides and quakes, you are also getting apocalyptic storms of superhot steam. We often call colony spaceships arcs, but usually the Noah analogy is about carrying a whole ecology to a new world, not getting rained on for 40 centuries. Needless to say, it also requires huge amounts of power to push that much ice around. There's about a cubic kilometer of water, a gigaton or a trillion liters, for every 6 people on this planet, or about 40 billion gallons apiece. If we assume it costs about $1,000 a kilogram to bring water in, on the low side of modern space launch costs, then we're looking at needing $170 trillion per person to pay that water bill. This is even worse for doing things like moving dwarf planets in to add mass for more gravity. Now, we tend to assume a lot cheaper cost and a more prosperous society for terraforming, one with more automation and better technology, but even here we want to be careful with these numbers, as by hand-waving them to AI or nanotech or genetically engineered microbes, we tend to overlook that other pathways that might be easier are still likely to be taken because they are seeing the actual accounting cost of time and effort, that 170 billion liter or $170 trillion per person cost, so to speak. So when somebody says, couldn't we go for more shallow seas, terrace the landscape to include elevated bodies of water, mountain lakes and seas on plateau basins, and just actively pump water back up? Indeed, we could do some neat effects that way, like mile-high waterfalls and fountains. Folks might say, yeah, that would be faster, put that water where we want, and even over very long timelines involves less energy use, and lets us do some cool things natural hydrology wouldn't. Nor is nanotech a magic fix. Dump a vial of nanobots on a planet and watch it terraform that planet in days, maybe even building large life forms in another Genesis parallel event. Science fiction likes to point to tiny self-replicating robots and ignore the fragility of the things, and that everything you do to make them stronger, sturdier, or smarter will slow their replication and work efforts. They also need power, and even if you're giving them that power, they radiate away as fast as they use it. If you want them changing the surface of a planet around at a chemical level, many decades would be required just to ensure it wasn't going so fast that they melted in their own waste heat. If we're talking about atomic level alteration, changing rocks into water so to speak, that planet is going to be many millennia of work at high temperatures to achieve that goal, if not much longer, and that's assuming you don't grey goo the planet into one blob of replicators, or a surface ocean of them powered by the sun, floating on rafts of dead nanobots molten and powerless below. The biological equivalent to nanobots is small microbes and tailored organisms, to terraform this new planet much like Earth itself got terraformed, or green gooed as it were. But people tend to assume this happens quickly too. On Earth, until photosynthesis developed, there wasn't really very much biomass and bioactivity. The sunlight allowed orders of magnitude more energy into the system, and that photosynthetic process began accumulating oxygen as a waste product. This was all occurring in the ocean, incidentally, oxygenating the water. It took about 1 billion years to accumulate enough oxygen to saturate all the iron around, and that free oxygen began accumulating significantly in the atmosphere, and then at least another 100 million years to get from under 1% to around 10%, on the low edge of what we could survive on and about half the modern level. Now, we could do better than a few billion years. We'll talk about some faster timelines and run some calculations based on the organisms and reactions involved in the Building Biospheres episode. Genetic engineering could create organisms that produced more waste oxygen, and if we're doing it faster, we don't have to worry about as much geological turnover, which will vary by planet anyway. Plants also don't really produce oxygen. Photosynthesis takes sunlight to turn carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen, and the plant will later burn that sugar with oxygen for power, in essentially the reverse process. This isn't net zero because a plant will use some of that glucose to build the cellulose that along with water makes up the bulk of its mass. You can determine how much oxygen a plant releases or carbon dioxide it stores up based on its cellulose content. Later, when the plant dies or gets eaten, that cellulose will end up sucking oxygen back in and letting that carbon dioxide back out. But some will always be present in the active life cycle, stored in various organisms, and a small amount will end up trapped in the ground, potentially forming fossil fuels later. This tiny imbalance eventually results in a surplus of oxygen that gets absorbed into things like iron or hydrogen or any number of other things and saturates them and fills the sky instead, hence the billion-year timeline. I should also note that I'm talking about plants here, but we're mostly talking about microbes, algae, and even other methods of photosynthesis than the classic cyanobacteria. That includes anoxygenic options, some relying on hydrogen sulfide, that we think might have been more common in our early oceans when oxygen was uncommon in them or the atmosphere. By which we mean free oxygen incidentally. Water is 89% oxygen by mass. Most rock is largely oxygen too. Getting oxygen on any planet is never the problem. Keeping it in a gas format is the problem, since oxygen likes to bond to everything. I don't doubt we could engineer things to do better, but as we move into terraforming efforts, we need to keep in mind that a society that can get to other planets is only guaranteed to have one thing, and that's energy abundance. How they produce it is hard to say, possibly fusion reactors, possibly tons of automated factories producing solar panels or mirrors. And a solar panel is vastly more efficient than a plant at making energy or oxygen. Plants just have the advantage that they more or less build themselves, but they don't particularly do that on dead planets lacking any air, water, or soil. Tailoring up a microbe that can live on an alien planet is going to depend a lot on the specific circumstances. We might find plenty of worlds that already have lots of water and nitrogen, and then we might decide the path of least resistance to set up large solar farms or reactors and start taking metallic rocks and turning them into metals, which produces oxygen as a waste byproduct. This doesn't mean we aren't using microbes too, but they may be intentionally built to go extinct. An early tailored life form to help build up soil and air more efficiently, only to be pushed out by organisms designed to live in that new, oxygen and soil-rich environment better. Which raises the point of what organisms you bring with you in the initial colony, because many won't be able to survive outside of domes or space habitats for at least many centuries, and you may need centuries just to build all the domes those critters would need to be a viable population. We should never assume a system is colonized by one lone spaceship showing up on one planet on day one, and never receiving follow-ups from home, or other colonies closer to your homeworld and more built up. In all probability, more spaceships will be arriving regularly, and many of those settlers won't be going anywhere near that planet, opting instead for building space habitats into various asteroids and moons. As another example of scale being misleading, one of the objects we often consider first building in a solar system is a stellarator, an enormous sun-powered beaming array made by dropping a pair of large mirrors into a star's corona to use it as their lasing medium and create a laser of immense scope. You could do this with solar panels and normal lasers orbiting a star too, but this is vastly easier since that mirror might be a millimeter thick and continent-sized, and still easier to build and maintain than one modest space habitat. Such beams are awesome for transmitting power to a planet, even adding sunlight to dim and cold ones, but we usually imagine using them to slow incoming spaceships down or send other ones up to very high speed without the need of fuel. This allows vastly faster and cheaper space travel between any two systems that have them, but initially you probably aren't using it that much, so you might devote it for pushing comets into a system or beaming energy to a planet. In this way though, you might decide to cook a barren, airless planet's surface into glass and metal, releasing a ton of oxygen and creating a thick layer of cooked material to prevent that oxygen getting quickly reabsorbed. I would not think this would be a popular option, any more than nuking a planet over and over to do the same thing, but both do actually work and are a lot more sane than they sound like. See our episode on nuking Mars for the details, but remember that all terraforming is inherently destructive to a planet's existing traits. In this case, even inefficient and thus dirty nuclear bombs would not really leave that much radioactive material behind, and it would all decay or get buried in much shorter timelines than normal for terraforming. Indeed, given that some microbes are radiotrophic, able to survive on high radiation, this might be a good way to build your early terraforming ecology that you want to die off, by employing genetically modified organisms that needed that radiation as part of their life cycle. We tend to think of little tiny machines or microbes doing the task because they do it independently once created and seeded, and because baking a planet seems so huge in operation, and we are assuming maybe a few thousand colonists doing all this work, so we look to nanobots or tailored organisms to do the heavy lifting. But a big old, mostly automated factory, a clanking self-replicator, has this same effect, and there's no reason a space factory couldn't be a large building on an asteroid that a human partially oversees that eats asteroids and kicks out parts for more factories like itself, while also making solar panels, mirrors, shades, or dome components. Realistically, it can probably do that job better than its weight in nanobots or microbes too. In the same way, we worry about planets losing their air from a lack of magnetosphere, and we also did an episode on giving Mars its own artificial magnetosphere that reviewed the options. But again, we need to remember the scale. For example, Venus has a very weak magnetosphere and a much thicker atmosphere than Earth, in spite of being closer to the Sun, which is what is doing most of the atmosphere stripping. People suggest trying to spin up a planet or give it a molten core, and ignore that big spinning blobs of molten metal is not, in fact, a very efficient way to produce magnetic fields, nor is a sphere right around a planet a good defense. A vastly weaker magnetic field between that planet and the Sun would deflect particles even better, and could just be conventional electromagnets running on solar panels. This is para-terraforming, not terraforming. That deflector needs maintenance, although it might be getting repaired by those magic nanobots too, or be one of hundreds of such magnets that work in tandem to deflect particles rather than just one that can break. But it's also the good kind of para-terraforming because atmosphere stripping takes a very long time, and if your civilization is producing entire planetary atmospheres from scratch in centuries or even millennia, then if your magnetic deflector breaks and you start losing tons of air to stripping that might take 1,000,000 years to take your atmosphere off, you just flip the machines back on while you fix that deflector, or even wait patiently for your settlers, who chose a life of techno-primitivism, to rediscover technology and rebuild the deflectors and air plants. And if they can't, one might argue their civilization is paying the cost for pursuing a bad strategy and without thinking it through to provide for obvious problems with safeguards and redundancy. This reinforces the point that a small colony on a strange new world is not arriving, building up, and then launching a space infrastructure. Rather, it starts in space, builds in space, and then begins building on that planet. All those space bases are heavy on para-terraforming aspects and maintenance, and you might use AI and nanobots for that, but outside of fiction, there is no reason to assume an entire populated system of multiple planets and thousands of space habitats or dug-in asteroids is going to abandon or lose all its technology, or forget it could radio its neighbors a few light years away and ask for technical help, or that some of those neighbors might just arrive to see why you went radio silent, looking for an opportunity to lend a hand, or conquer you. So any para-terraforming that would take untold centuries to completely break down isn't really an issue anyway. After all, natural environments change and break too. This philosophy is likely to be a key for settlers, and one to keep in mind as we move on to look at their early toolbox of terraforming techniques and their goalposts for mid-range and the long term. Permanence is a nice option if available, but it usually will not be, and to folks on the ground doing the work, generation after generation, they are likely to be focused on more immediate and practical goals, and keenly aware that building stuff designed to last without help for billions of years is likely to be pointless, since even if possible, their descendants might decide to change things. As we discussed in our Post-Human Pathways episode, we could imagine early colonists wanting to see the process through and having themselves adapted to live millions of years and retain their sanity, even doing things like having themselves imprinted as a hive mind on a forest ecology or algae intelligence in a lake. Odds are good a lot of technologies for life extension, transhumanism, AI, and advanced automation will all exist before we ever settle the first planet outside this solar system, and maybe even for a place like Mars or Venus. Certainly as we go on to settle the trillions of planets in this galaxy over the next couple million years, we should assume a lot of advanced techniques will be developed long before most of those worlds even see an exploratory flyby probe. So the methods available for colonizing Mars or Alpha Centauri or Tau Ceti are likely to be much more limited initially than the majority of our future settlements. And as with Pancosmorio theory, which reasons that no planet is likely to ever be a perfect match to allow a perfect copy of Earth's ecosystems, terraforming is likely to always require active effort to keep it maximally Earth-like, while for settlers after a few thousand years, a new ecology optimized around that planet might be more desirable anyway, and not require as much constant effort to sustain. Planets can de-terraform themselves without continuous effort, even if it might take millions of years in some cases. So let's talk about some hypothetical planetary situations. On the planet of Nevaska, the colony ship set out on seeing flyby probe data indicating a relatively warm world with existing oceans, but during their 3-century flight time, it entered a rapid ice age, freezing the planet nearly to its equator and had no sizable landmasses in that region, all being closer to the poles. They believed with time the ice age would end, but would need a lot of ground study to figure out the cycles. They were also hesitant to set off any greenhouse effects without more local data. In the meantime, they erected a handful of solar mirrors in ammonia orbit to focus sunlight down on a region they originally planned to colonize, designated New Portugal, and about the size of the Iberian Peninsula, causing it to warm up. Once they better understood the factors causing the ice age, they would decide if they wished to add more orbital mirrors, utilize greenhouse gases, or do as some suggested and adapt their quarter environment, complete with heavy doming and subterranean cities. They did not build mirrors, but rather repurposed the immense solar sail they had used to help slow down the ship on arrival, which had previously been packed into their prow to serve as additional radiation shielding. On the planet Taran, gravity was 25% higher than on Earth, and there was relatively little land, with very deep oceans. The population split on opting for more submarine life versus building artificial floating dome islands, with many suggesting genetic engineering for stronger bones and muscles, while others suggested genetic engineering to be aquatic. Others suggested a large maglev track around the planet's equator could be built with the materials originally intended for an orbital ring, on pontoons, and a perpetual world-girdling train could be run, whose fast movement would generate centrifugal force to partially counteract the gravity, lowering it to Earth normal. Still others suggested extensive use of atomic weapons against the seafloor could generate more landmass. On the desert world of Herbert F, the 6th planet around a bright A-type star prone to powerful flares, it was found the system's equivalent of a Kuiper belt appeared to have been blown or perturbed away, and that there were far too few icy bodies and moons to give that planet a true ocean. Rather than giving up and adopting a desert culture, they used the sand to make glass for shaded domes and sealed their air and water inside, thus enjoying a comfortable paradise. They planned to keep extending dome after dome outward from their main settlement and others until they covered the entire planet in a glass house, or ward house. In the long term, they planned to mine for what ice and volatiles they could in the outer system, while erecting an immense solar shade between them and Herbert Prime, which would cool them, and rather than deflecting solar wind away magnetically, they would funnel it in for capture. As solar wind is mostly hydrogen, they would combine it with oxygen to form water for their planet and its handful of space habitats until they turned its sandy dunes into lakes and oceans. On the planet Lentara, while a hot planet, conditions were otherwise just about right, except the day was 78 hours long. While some suggested ways to speed the planet's rotation up, this would be an immense and time-consuming process of scores of millennia. They opted instead to salvage their own solar sail and use it as a planetary shade. Borrowing from the technique used on many tidally locked worlds around red dwarfs, they placed it at their L1 Lagrange point, spinning on its central axis to provide rigidity, then spun it like a flipping coin so it would rotate between them and their sun, on a 26-hour spin, giving the planet 2 extra night phases, and planning to add in more mirrors on a halo orbit to help light its long natural night times of 39 hours. On the Chthonian planet of New Mercury, where the sun bakes the planet and the days last a month, vast, mostly reflective umbrellas have been erected over craters, styled on the mushroom habitats of Mercury, but doming in the entire crater to seal its air inside. The crater walls have been lined with watertight ceramic sealant noted for its poor thermal conductivity, allowing those inside to stay relatively cool. The umbrella is shuttled to the side during the 2-week dark period to help with cooling and allow the colonists an unobstructed vision of the night sky. On Manatara, a tidally locked world around a very unstable red dwarf, the settlers decided a sunshade wasn't viable at this time, and opted to live on the relatively warm dark side of the planet, full of lava tubes and volcanic activity. They focused initial terraforming on a fungal ecology, creating vast bioluminescent mushroom forest in the sulfur-rich caves on the edge of the equatorial zone and the northern band of the eternal glaciers. They themselves lived in nuclear-powered cities among the caves and ice that varied little from the space habitats that they built deeper out in the system. On Metalis, a once burned-out husk of a world around an extragalactic star halfway to the Andromeda Galaxy, an unchecked prototype nanobot terraforming Vanguard converted the entire surface of the planet into gray goo. Over the millennia, they diversified into a photovoltaic ecology of diverse nanobots and larger techno-organisms living near the surface, and those living deep down by harvesting geothermal energy or by cannibalizing the detritus that drifts down the silver seas from the surface realms. Unable to reach orbit by themselves, the planet is surrounded by thousands of low-gravity spinning spheres containing relatively simple forest ecologies inhabited by no one but the simple subhuman AIs who tend them. Nature preserves a million light-years from the world that spawned the life they preserve. Lastly, on Gemini, we have a world with too much sea and sky, and a rare double planet nearby which lacks them. They decide to build large floating habitats there and an immense mass driver attached to an orbital ring, by which they plan to fire a giant stream of water and air at their barren neighbor, rendering both habitable. They expect this process to last many millennia, and scientists look forward to seeing if an ecology might emerge inside the river in the sky. We were talking about building domes on new planets today, and there's actually a question whether or not you would find it easier to build domed farms on planets like Mars or Venus, or just pipe food down on ships or space elevators from orbital farms. Whether or not you're feeding planets with them, you also have a large space-based population needing to eat, and you probably aren't dedicating space in your over-engineered and beautifully landscaped space habitats to that either. In this month's Nebula exclusive, we'll be examining those orbital farms. If you didn't know, Nebula, the largest creator-owned streaming service, has tons of extra content from myself and many other creators, including a new, full-length episode of SFIA like Orbital Farms that we release on the first day of every month. And every episode of this show also airs on Nebula a few days early and ad-free, no random commercials or built-in ads like this one. Using my code, IsaacArthur, you can get 40% off and join for about $3 a month, about the price of the drink or snack you've been enjoying during the episode. We also now have lifetime memberships and gift cards available to let you share Nebula with friends and family. When you sign up at my link, go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur, and use my code, IsaacArthur, you not only get access to all the great stuff Nebula offers, like Orbital Farms, you also be directly supporting this show. So before we get to the schedule, let me remind all of our American viewers that we have an election this week, and I hope you will exercise your right to vote. And also to please respect our general admonition to keep political discussion on our forums to a minimum, especially right around and after elections. So today we looked at terraforming planets, and this Thursday, November 7th, we'll look at how to harvest planets, even disassembly them down to their cores. Then on November 10th, we'll have an extensive update on fusion power, how it works, and what progress we've made in recent years. We'll follow that with a detailed look at the question of what we should do if aliens made contact with us. If you'd like to get alerts when those and other episodes come out, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. You can also help support the show by becoming a member here on YouTube or at Patreon, or check out other ways to help at isaacarthur.net. Until next time, thanks for watching, and have a great week.